Dr. Trudi Deakin.
Education is not very sexy, is it? Oh, you know, shall we all go home now? How can I keep you all stimulated in the next hour? Well, one good thing on my side is that you all had a real food lunch, so you're not going to fall asleep on me, are you? And so I still got the challenge of keeping you engaged. And education should be informative and it should be fun. And so we've tried to make the education that we deliver to patients fun and engaging, and we're pleased to report we're having 82% completion rate on the 6-week programs that people attend. So I think, you know, and those people who can't attend every session, it's often down to work or illness or holidays. So we think we're doing it. We can always improve, we're always re-evaluating, and we're always striving to do better. But education, is this working? Oh, it helps if you turn it on, I suppose. Right. Education, it's a right, isn't it? As Sam said, I started out in the 1990s as a dietitian in the NHS. And now I left the NHS in 2008 and set up a registered charity called Expert Health, so I could further develop and evaluate and test out different models of delivering education. So my journey started in the 1990s, and I quite shortly specialised in diabetes. And it was like a conveyor belt. I was doing 9 clinics a week, and people coming in, seeing the consultant, the dietitian, the nurses, getting clips of information. And they were saying to me things like, but I don't eat sugar, so why are my blood sugars high? And I thought, they don't understand what diabetes is. They don't understand what happens to food when they eat it. And it's not just sugar that impacts on blood glucose levels, it's carbohydrate. So I started to do some active listening. Started to hold focus groups and say to people, what information would help you better manage your diabetes? How would you like that information delivered? And what they said to me very loud and clear is that we don't want to be talked at. We don't want to be just given a leaflet and be told to go away and just follow the leaflet. We want to understand how our bodies work. So that started my journey to try and help people to self-manage their condition. And now we've got 3 programs: the prevention of diabetes, type 2 program for people, the expert diabetes program for type 2s, and the expert insulin program for type 1 and type 2s. And this summer we're launching the expert weight management program, and we're piloting with the national grid, so it's going to be for employees working with the national grid. People don't want a degree in nutrition, they don't want a degree in physiology, but what they want to do is put the jigsaw pieces together and understand their bodies better. So we see it as collaboration. It's about us as educators working together with members of the public to help that kind of desired goal of people making informed decisions. So our education isn't dictatorial, it's not prescriptive, it's all about people learning the information and then making informed decisions. So we deliver the education. If you're learning to drive, you don't just take one driving lesson. You take a series of driving lessons. And we've explored and found out that 15 hours is about the right amount of education that people need to start to really understand their bodies better. And the education in the current programs is over 6 weeks, so it's 2.5-hour sessions for 6 consecutive weeks. But the weight program will allow people to come at lunchtime, so it's shorter sessions over 12 weeks. So at the end, we use discovery learning, but at the end of every week, it's about people setting goals. You know, from listening to the topic this week, what's my biggest concern right now? Now we know behaviour isn't often the problem, it's the things that cause the behaviour. So if you think of behaviour as the iceberg sticking out of the water, what's causing the behaviour, like the evening snacking or something like that, is the things that underpin that behaviour, things hidden away underneath the murky waters, like values and beliefs and past experiences. So once people have explored that, it's thinking about, well, what's the way forward? What could I do to tackle this concern? But if people try everything, how do they end up feeling? Overwhelmed. So the next bit is, well, when I leave this session today, what am I going to try out and experiment? And experiment is a big word because we don't always get it right, we're human beings, but by experimenting, we can find out what works for us, because what works for me doesn't necessarily work for anybody else. And people need to evaluate, what do I want to happen after making this goal? When do I want it to happen? And how will I know if it has happened? So it's all about that constant evaluation as well. We're creatures of habit. So if you do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And so it's about sometimes stopping and thinking, okay, what could I do differently? What are my health goals? Everything in life, there's good choices and bad choices. And if we make more of the better choices, then the consequences will improve. So there's exercise. So in the handbook, there's every week there's goal setting forms for them to complete if they want to do so. Some people would rather just work things out in their head. Some people like to write everything down. Again, we're all different. So those people who came to the workshop this afternoon, I was using a tablet and doing drag and drop. And we either do it that way or we use magnetic boards and magnetic labels. The reason why we don't use PowerPoint is that if you use PowerPoint, you have to do it in a certain order. And therefore, you can't follow the conversations that your group wish to have. You have to say, no, we're doing it this way and this way only. So by using either drag or drop or a magnetic board, you're following the needs of your group. So this is a put together kind of magnetic board after the What is Diabetes activity, which we do in week 1. And to give you a sense of the discussions that might take place, we call this discovery learning. We start off with the board almost blank. And we talk about food, when we eat this sandwich, a picture of a sandwich up there, when we eat this sandwich, what are the 3 main nutrients that the sandwich breaks down into? Well, it's carbohydrate, protein and fat. Which one of those nutrients breaks down and directly impacts on blood glucose levels? A lot of people will say fat, because they're programmed to believe that fat is bad for them. So, I can see where you're coming from. That's a common thought, but let's explore that further. It's carbohydrate. What's carbohydrate? Building blocks of glucose and fruit sugar, fructose, and the milk sugar, galactose. And when we break it down, the glucose goes into the blood and it raises blood glucose levels. But, we like to use glucose for energy, but can we use the glucose for energy when it's in the blood? No, we can't. Where does it go? It's got to get into the body cells. How does it get into the body cells? That's where the insulin comes in. So we produce insulin. So getting it into the body cells, we produce the insulin, which acts like a key. So it fits perfectly in the keyhole of the cell wall, unlocks the door, and allows the glucose to enter the cell. Ideally, we would then want to use that for energy. But if we don't need it for energy, we store it as glycogen, and if the glycogen stores are full, we then convert it to fat. So that's what should happen, and in somebody who hasn't got diabetes or excellent diabetes control, blood glucose levels tend to remain between 4 and 7. But we now know that 2/3 of the population are overweight. What causes that? What causes people to be overweight? Well, we all know it's the high insulin levels. So if people are producing too much insulin, and they've got the insulin resistance, the insulin causes the body to be in fat storage mode. So there's going to be storing more fat and creating the insulin resistance. So then they can still get the blood glucose levels into the cell and produce some energy, but not as much. Now, type 2 diabetes, as we know, is a complete opposite condition to type 1 diabetes, where they stop producing the insulin, and so they're hypoinsulinic rather than hyperinsulinic. But the symptoms are the same, aren't they? The symptoms of both type 1 and type 2 diabetes are raised blood glucose levels. They rise above 10, then they flush out in the kidneys, out in the urine, so we have it here showing as a waterfall. So that gives you an idea of how we educate people about what diabetes is. Now, a common belief is that type 2 diabetes, if people live long enough, then they'll start making less insulin and they'll need insulin injections. And this is a really good graph here that shows, if you look at line A, it shows that, is this working? Yeah. Oh, dear. That yes, you know, the peak of insulin, the first phase insulin response, does reduce from somebody who's got impaired glucose tolerance who is obese to somebody with advanced type 2 diabetes. But if you look at line B, then the peak is still higher than somebody who is normal and lean, and the basal insulin levels are still much, much higher than somebody who is normal lean or normal obese. So type 2 diabetes is a condition of hyperinsulinemia. So why then have we spent years giving people with type 2 diabetes insulin? And we're just relaunching our insulin program, and the slogan is reduce or omit, because it's for type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Well, type 1s will never be able to omit their insulin, but by changing their lifestyle and reducing the refined carbohydrate, they can certainly reduce their insulin requirements. Type 2s, now we're hearing many, many stories of people with type 2 diabetes being able to come off their insulin altogether. And so we educate people to understand their health results. So the metabolic syndrome, then there's, you know, if people have got 3 or more of these conditions that are out of target, then they're going to have insulin resistance. So we help to educate people to understand what the metabolic syndrome is and to be able to, because you can't have a test in routine care around, you know, to test if you're insulin resistant or if you've got high insulin levels. But if people have got 3 or more of these factors that are out of target, then that suggests that they've got the insulin resistance and high insulin levels. So this is the patient's handbook, and on the last page of the handbook, people can plot their health results. So we really encourage people to go to their GP and get their health results. We do explain they want to have all of these done, and so, you know, we say, well, you'll have the ones done that are required for you, because the last thing we want is get really unpopular with GPs saying, why have you told my patient that they need all these health results? So we're very clear that they may not have all these results done. Now this is, we're just developing the expert weight one, and we've actually removed total cholesterol because it's meaningless, and LDL cholesterol because it's calculated and not actually measured from the expert weight health indicators, monitoring health form. And we've replaced it with visceral fat, because now with Tanita's weighing scales, you can actually have a visceral fat, so that's the fat in and around the organs. You can actually measure that with the scales or getting an assessment. And we've also replaced it with the waist to height ratio, because that's a really good monitor. So if the waist to height ratio is less than 0.5, then that suggests that you are healthy. So it's much more around the waist circumference than it is around the actual body mass index. So the clinical indicators, so the health indicators, are explained in their handbook, so people can back up the education between sessions by reading through the information. And we really do focusing on waist circumference, the importance of measuring the waist, and also how to do it, because it's something that people can quite easily do themselves at home. And then we have pointers. So if people want to lose weight, reduce their triglycerides, increase their HDL, reduce their blood pressure, then we give little tips, so things that people could experiment with and try out to achieve their health outcomes. And a lot of it really focuses on the 7 lifestyle factors for optimum health. So the running kind of theme throughout the program is talking about, you know, what is a healthy diet, physical activity, stopping smoking, controlling stress, and sleeping well, and remembering to take prescribed medication if it's required, and drinking alcohol in moderation. In session 2, then we really address the limitations to do with energy balance, the eat less, move more message. And instead, we replace it by saying that obesity is a hormonal condition. And, you know, if insulin levels are high, that's just only one of the many hormones involved, then that puts the body in fat storage mode. If the body is storing energy, rather than that energy being available to use, that leaves that individual feeling tired and lethargic. Over the years, the amount of patients I see who have tried really, really hard with the eat less, move more message and ended up just feeling completely miserable because they're tired all the time and they're hungry all the time. And this offers hope. I know Jen talks about hope a lot. This offers hope to a lot of patients who have tried to lose weight for many years. And when they've done that, they create an energy deficit. So if they require 2,000 calories, and I'm just repeating now what Jason Funn said this morning, if they require 2,000 calories in a day and they drop it down to 1,500 by eating less and moving more, yes, of course they'll lose weight in the short term. All diets work in the short term. So yes, they will see it and then they'll feel really motivated then. But then what happens? The weight plateaus. Why does it plateau? Because the body responds to less food being taken in, and so it reduces the metabolic rate. So the basal metabolic rate drops to 1,500 calories. So what happens then? The weight's plateaued and the person starts to lose their willpower. They start to get fed up because they're not seeing any further weight on the scales. So they start to put back in their food, their diet, their favourite foods, because the foods that they've been missing. So what happens then? They regain the weight that they've lost. But because the basal metabolic rate still stays low, they overshoot and put more weight on. So they end up with a higher set point. So they often end up at higher weight than what they were before. So when you hear about all diets fail, yes, they all work in the short term, but most people end up weighing more after a diet than they do before. What happens to their willpower? They believe that they've done something wrong. They believe often that they're a failure. And so they'll say, right, I'll do better next time. So it becomes a vicious circle where they think, right, I'll try harder next time, I'll do it better. Let's turn this around to be so much more motivating. Let's think about low carb intermittent fasting. How will that do it? So people can base their foods on real foods or miss out some meals. They'll lose weight, but there'll be no plateau. Because if you drive down the insulin levels, the body can use its own, it's like taking the padlock off the fridge. The body then can use its own fat stores as energy. So the body's getting the energy, so it doesn't need to slow down. So there's no plateau. So then people can continue to do the low carb, the real food eating and the intermittent fasting, so they can lose further weight. So then they can reset their body weight at a lower level. So the after is a much better picture. And what does that create? Confidence. Confidence to continue and adopt the dietary approach as a sustainable, lifelong approach. So how do we teach people about nutrition? Well, we've developed our own model, Nutrition for Health model. Yes, there are some similarities to the Eat Badly guide because there are 5 food groups, but that's where the similarities stop. So we encourage 5 to 9 portions of fruits and vegetables, 2 to 3 portions of good quality protein, 2 to 3 portions of the milk and dairy. But you'll see that the carbs and the fats merge into one another. And that's where patient choice and options come in, because we're all unique and we all have different taste preferences. So we offer 4 dietary approaches, either low fat, Mediterranean, low carb or intermittent fasting. People like to have choice. As adults, we don't like to be told. Now, many people have been programmed for decades that fat is bad. They don't actually like the taste of fat any longer. And if they're able to adopt a real food diet by keeping fat restricted and having more carbohydrate, that works for them and helps them to maintain their health goals or achieve their health goals, who would knock that? So we do support people in adopting all 4 dietary approaches. So this is what we show when we're looking at the low fat dietary approach. You'll see the line there restricting the fat and people consuming more carbohydrate. But there's nothing in that processed square in the centre, perhaps for the odd cereal bar or something like that. So if people adopt a real food diet, they're cutting out the biscuits, the crisps, the snacks, and those things can actually help people to lose weight and lower their blood glucose levels. Most people, even going on a low-fat real food diet, are actually reducing their total amount of carbs in a day. When we talk about the Mediterranean style of eating, then people are having a similar amount of carbohydrate as they're having fat. So around 40% of the calories come from fat, around 40% of the calories come from carbohydrate. And so some people say, yes, really like that dietary approach, that works for me. But other people who are perhaps more insulin resistant, struggling to get their glycemic control or lose weight, might decide to go for a low carb dietary approach. If they're just going low carb, they might go less than 130 grams a day. If they're going very low carb, then they're going less than 50 grams a day. It's personal choice. The advantage of very low carb is the being in nutritional ketosis. And that scares a lot of healthcare professionals, especially when they work in diabetes, because they think of ketones as being deadly, DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis. But the two conditions are completely separate. If people achieve nutritional ketosis of levels between 0.5 and 3, when insulin levels are low, blood glucose levels are low, and they're not completely hypoinsulinic, then it's a healthy state to be in. Babies are in a state of nutritional ketosis, and that helps with the high-fat breast milk, and that helps the brain development. And then with intermittent fasting, then, you know, those last few decades, we started eating 5 or 6 times a day. And that's not the way that our ancestors ate. That drives forward, it drives up insulin levels. So the green is the good there. So the green on the top graph shows a very small period of time in a 24-hour period where somebody is able to use their own fat stores for energy. Whereas the bottom graph, that person is just having lunch and evening meal. So just see how much more time there are where the green section is, which means that the insulin levels has dropped and they're able to use their own fat stores for energy. So that person who's just having, you know, even somebody just cutting the snacks can achieve weight loss and improve glycemic control much better by reducing the frequency at which they eat. Let's look at this in a hormone level. A reduced calorie diet drives up insulin levels and therefore drives up fat storage. And Jason talked about the hunger hormone, the ghrelin this morning, so that stimulates the ghrelin, so then people feel hungry and tired all the time. Long-term weight loss is not possible. So in comparison to that, the intermittent fasting, then insulin levels low, ghrelin levels low, and so they increase more leptin, which reduces hunger. So leptin is released, a chemical hormone that's released from our fat cells, and that reduces hunger. Also a gut hormone, a hormone that we produce in the gut, PYY, that is released as well, and that also reduces hunger. And so that is one of the ways that people can succeed with losing and having a lower set point for their weight over a period of time. Different types, again, there's so much choice. People might do time-restricted eating. And so they might fast for 14 hours in a day and eat for 10. Or they might fast for 20 hours a day and eat for 4 hours. Or they might fast for 24 hours and not eat anything. They might do it once a week, twice a week, every day. So there's so many options there for people to do. When we're thinking about, when we talk about fasting, people think about the 5-2 because that's very, very popular. But does it have to be 5-2? No, they could fast for just 1 day and eat for 6. Or they could fast for 6 days and eat for 1. There's so many options there available. And then there's alternate day fasting as well. So people can just test out and say, well, okay then, what works for me? Now there's myths, isn't there? And Jason did talk about some of these this morning, so I'm just going to fly through them. Fasting, you need to eat to keep your metabolic rate up. That's nonsense. So when you fast, then your metabolic rate has keeps high because of the hormones, but also because you're using your own fat stores. The body doesn't feel it's being starved. People think, well, it's a starvation diet. No, it's not a starvation diet because when you break the fast, you eat well. You eat to satiety. I'm going to lose my muscle. No, the body will always use fat if it's available. So you drive down the insulin levels, the body will use fat in preference to muscle. It will cause disordered eating. People will start binging. Well, if people have got an eating disorder already, then yes, but that means they're already binging. But what you find, because it drives down hunger, people often say, I'm not as hungry any longer. So when they break the fast, they may have more calories in that meal than what they would have done if they hadn't have been fasting, but it's not going to, be excessive compared to what they were doing before. It's nutrient deficient. No, it's not, because people, when they break the fast, are eating real foods which are nutrient dense. But breakfast, isn't that the most important meal of the day? No, there's no evidence to support that at all. Breakfast is not the most important meal of the day, especially if you're eating refined cereals. So the top tips is keep hydrated, have salt, get some bone broth to keep the minerals in, the natural minerals in, and stick with it, because if we're programmed to having breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, evening meal, supper, then you are going to feel like psychologically you will miss that eating at first. But if people stick with it, they often get used to it. So when people experiment, we say, well, give it time, because we are creatures of habit and it takes time. And don't try to do intermittent fasting with low calorie. Don't count calories. When you break the fast, eat to satiety, true fullness. So we give people in their resource books information about different foods, which food group it belongs in. And the reason why we do this is that people can assess the diets then of how many portions they're having of different foods. So we teach people to perform their own dietary assessment. In the old-fashioned way, people used to go to a dietitian and have their diet assessed and be told what to do. So we've completely turned it around and said, assess your own diet. We've got a simple model here, and this is how you do it. Plot a typical day of how many portions you're having of fruit and veg, protein, milk and dairy, fats and carbs. So then you can see what your starting point is. What dietary approach are you currently having? How many foods are in that processed square and how many foods are outside it? And so people can determine what a portion is, because a lot of people say, oh, I've had a banana, that's a portion of fruit. Well, if that banana, the edible part of that banana, weighs 160 grams, which is very, very easy, that's 2 portions of fruit, not 1 portion of fruit. So, people portion, especially fruit, portion sizes have got so much bigger. So it's allowing people to really understand what a portion is. And so they can look at the present diet and plot that and say, okay then, yes, I'm currently having a low-fat dietary approach. What do I want to do? What is my aims and how am I going to achieve that? And then they can ask themselves questions about, I'm having the right amount of carbohydrate for my dietary approach, etc., etc. So we then have to go, and those people, I'm being a bit repetitive for those people who attended the workshop this afternoon on fat awareness, but what we found is that if people are going to adopt a real food dietary approach, whether it's low carb, Mediterranean or whatever, they have to get over their fear of having healthy fats. So we do fat awareness. So in our blood we have glucose, that's a healthy level. We have a small amount of insulin. We have some triglycerides, so a triglyceride of 1 is healthy. We have hopefully large buoyant LDL, so we've got 3 in there. And we don't want any small dense LDL, but we do want some HDL, so we put them in there. We show them as transporters because our blood vessel is a bit like a motorway system. And cholesterol is essential to life, and the trucks, the LDL, carry it to where it's needed. And the HDL, the road sweeper, picks up the bits that excess and takes it back to the liver where we can repackage it. So when we talk about fat awareness, that's a healthy picture. How do we get that? We get that healthy picture from eating real foods. So food, ooh dear, keep on pressing the wrong thing. So foods that, the butter, the eggs, so the natural saturated fat and dietary cholesterol in real foods, as well as the oily fish and the monounsaturated fats like the oil, like the olive oil. So that is not going to create an unhealthy picture in our blood vessels. But this is a different story, and this person is at increased risk of cardiovascular disease because what are they doing? They're having the junk food diet. They're having the the processed foods with the trans fats and excess carbohydrates, and a lot of the omega-6 processed refined oils as well. And so their body is going to be in a state of inflammation and high insulin levels, which are go drive forward, high triglyceride levels, fatty liver, triglyceride-rich transporters cause the trucks to shrink to cars. And if you want an explanation, I haven't got time to give it to you now, but I do have written a paper on that which explains the processes involved, how the large buoyant LDLs shrink to small dense ones if there's too much triglyceride in the blood. So there's information for the participants in the handbooks to back up all that education. And in week 3, then we do the carbohydrate awareness as well, because people have kind of programmed, especially when they're diagnosed with diabetes, think it's sugar that's all bad and forget the rest of the carbohydrates. So we show here that a slice of bread, 3 teaspoons of sugar, a small apple and a glass of milk all have the same amount of carbohydrate, around 15 grams of carbohydrate. And the amount of carbohydrate is important. But then the way that they impact on the blood glucose levels are slightly different, and that's based on the building blocks. So you can see under the bread there, your building blocks of the bread is glucose. And so all that glucose goes directly into the blood. So that's got the highest GI. So a lot of the starchy staples in our diet have got higher GIs than sugar. So why has sugar got a lower GI? Well, that's because sugar is half glucose and half fructose. The fructose goes to the liver, where it's either stored as glycogen, but if the glycogen stores are full, it's converted to triglycerides de novo lipogenesis, making new fat. Oh my goodness. Right. I'll start speaking very quickly. And so, yes, you know, sugary foods might not have the same direct stimulation on blood glucose levels, but they do have a direct impact on the fat that's in the liver, and they can still impact on blood glucose levels later if it's converted to glycogen. So that is somebody who's eating beyond their carbohydrate, their personal carbohydrate threshold. And so we all have our own personal carbohydrate threshold. We all know people can have a huge amount of carbs and keep slim and healthy with all their blood results in the right sections, whereas other people just respond badly to carbohydrates. So how do people know what their personal carbohydrate threshold is? They learn about the sources of carbohydrate in the diet, and we play a quiz, which is the winging team gets a prize to help people become more carbohydrate aware. And also we look at the impact of those carbohydrate foods on insulin levels. And so we said to people, okay then, one of the ways that you know if you're eating the carbs to the right amount, if you're eating too much, then it's likely your blood glucose levels are going to be raised. You're going to struggle maintaining or losing weight. You might be feeling tired and hungry all the time, and you might have an indication that you've got fatty liver. And so we help people who've got diabetes, we help people go through a flow chart to identify what their carbohydrate threshold is. If they haven't got diabetes and they want to do it through weight management, then that's another flow chart there which helps people to identify what a right level of carbohydrate may be for them. Might not be for them, but it's a starting point that they can experiment with. In week 4, we look at understanding food labelling. Now, obviously, if people are eating real food, they're not going to be buying a lot of food in packages, but they will still be buying some food in packages, and they need to understand it. Now, unfortunately, our food labelling system is based on a low-fat diet. So reference intakes, traffic light coding are all there to support people having a low-fat diet. So we've developed our own guidance for people who adopt a Mediterranean style or a low-carb diet. So for instance, it says there that a low-carb food, generally speaking, rule of thumb, is where the carbohydrate content is less than 10 grams per 100 grams. People have loads and loads of questions. Can I have coconut oil? Can I have full fat, whole fat milk and dairy? What about chocolate? So we've got 9 pages of frequently asked questions that really help people, you know, and rather than getting on the phone or emailing you, it gives them all those answers right there and then. And people ask a lot of questions around alcohol as well, and we've colour coded these with alcohol. It's got virtually no carbohydrate, moderate amount of carbohydrate, or large amount of carbohydrate. Chocolate, isn't it interesting? As the darker the chocolate, the carbs come down, but also the fibre increases. So 99% cocoa chocolate, 20 grams of fibre per 100 grams, and 80% of that is soluble fibre. We discourage snacks, but if people have to have a snack for a medical reason or replacing a meal with a snack, then nuts are by far the healthiest choice. And in diabetes, the digestive biscuit is often being thought of as being suitable for people with diabetes. And this just goes to show that nuts are by far the healthiest snack. Now, if people aren't put off with the sheer amount of the omega-6 fatty acids in the seed of vegetable oils, then, so you can see at the bottom line there, you can see that the sunflower oil and the corn oil much higher in the omega-3s, then if that doesn't put people off having them, the processing will, because the seeds are healthy that go into that processing, but the end product is nothing healthy about it at all. In fact, when you use vegetable oils for cooking, the volatile aldehydes are 20 times greater than what the World Health Organization say that we should be having. I'm going to have to really rush now, I think. There's information there on omega. These slides will become available, or won't they? So a lot of the information. People ask questions about sweeteners, and so we kind of say, well, polyols, if you have to use one, polyols are more natural, and they can break down short-chain fatty acids and help the gut microbiome as well. Talk about physical activity, the benefits, frequency, intensity, time and type. And encourage people, like activity bracelets are very motivating for people to count steps and things like that. And you can get apps on mobile phones as well. And keeping an activity log, not just for aerobic but also resistance training as well. And then in week 5, not to cause anxiety, but people really do want to know what the possible complications are. Now, on a day-to-day basis, it's fluctuations, isn't it, in blood glucose levels, even in people without diabetes, and that can cause hunger and tiredness, mood changes. And if people are taking medication to drive down blood glucose levels, it can be also quite dangerous as well. So if people make changes to their lifestyle, they may be able to come off that medication, and they see their blood glucose level fluctuations level out. But, dementia is classed as type 3 diabetes, isn't it? And I've just read a fantastic book by Amy Berger on the Alzheimer's antidote, and great book, so many things we're learning about how our lifestyle can actually, changing our lifestyle can reduce our risk of developing all of these possible complications. They're all 80% of the diabetes budget in the NHS is spent on managing diabetes complications, and they're all preventable. So they're giving guidance of what the complications are and how to reduce them. And we also go back to the 7 lifestyle factors to prevent. And we focus more in on stress and sleep. And I agree with Malcolm when he said earlier that we all come across stress every single day. The problem is when stress becomes a strain. So it's all about, yes, we have stress in our lives, but how can we deal with it better? How can we have better sleep? In week 6, this is right at the end, to bring everything together, education should be fun. So I've designed this game, and it's a bit like Snakes and Ladders. You have 6 teams, and they can only move down the board if they answer a multiple choice question correctly. And the multiple choice question is based on the content of the programme. And they might end up on a penalty square, such as heart attack, go for cardiac rehab. So they go into the heart for cardiac rehab. Or they might go on a square saying, you've walked for 30 minutes today, shake again. They start off as carbohydrate, and if they go on a bonus square, they digest into glucose, and their insulin is released from the pancreas. They enter the blood vessel, they've got to dodge hyperglycemia, hypoglycemia, insulin resistance, and they've got to get right in at that bonus one at the end. They answer the last question correctly, they're the winning team, and they get a prize. So it's really good fun, people get awfully competitive, but it's a great way to finish the programme. So that's me done. We believe that we should educate, not medicate, and let food be like medicine. So thank you very much for your attention.